Isn't it funny what we remember? I often think that these memories that we have that come out of nowhere, that stay with us, are one of the ways in which God speaks to us. Remember that, God might say? When I was a kid, I spent an ever so brief time as a Boy Scout. Can you imagine? I don't remember much about that time as a scout, but I do remember a few meetings in church parish houses, cookouts, meals. I remember shopping for the outfit, and I remember being super excited to learn that there was a Boy Scout catalog filled with hiking and camping equipment. But the thing I remember most vividly was one camping trip and one counselor, or shall we call him a shepherd. Now, you must know that I've never really caught the camping out bug. It's just never been a thing for me. Maybe because I grew up on a farm and spending time outside was often a chore and not a treat. But on this particular camping expedition I went on with 10 to 14 other boys, you might guess I was the kid that tended to hang back with the counselors. The counselors were much kinder and safer, in my opinion. With the counselors, I didn't face potential ridicule or teasing. With the counselors, I was less tense. And so it happened that on that camping trip night, with the campfire blazing and boys circled with marshmallows and sticks, I was in my tent. I wanted the night and the experience to end as quickly as possible. And the best way to do that was to go to sleep. But I remember a knock. "Charlie?" came a voice from outside the tent. "Yes." "What are you doing?" the voice said. "I'm going to sleep." "Hey," the counselor said, "it's kind of early. Why don't you go hang out with the other boys?" So that's what I remember. That's what I remember. And I can't tell you why I remember that so distinctly, but I think it's because I could hear in this counselor's voice that he knew I was intimidated and scared. I could hear in that counselor's voice that he wanted me to grow and learn and have fun. And I could hear in his voice a gentle nudge, one that was going to require me to put a whole lot of trust in him. Maybe we've all been there. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He leads me beside still waters and through green pastures. Psalm 23. It is perhaps the most well-known piece of scripture next to the Lord's Prayer. And do you ever wonder why? Well, it's categorized as a psalm of trust. A psalm of trust. And what categorizes any important relationship? What's an element of any important relationship, be it shepherd and sheep, student and teacher, Boy Scout and camp counselor, Sunday school teacher and student? It is trust. Anytime we follow, anytime we lead, it involves trust. Today's story from our gospel also involves a character who puts a whole lot of trust in the person guiding him. And you know, I've spoken with you about the Gospel of John, and we know that John can take a pretty long time to tell a story. And you notice that today we're in the 10th chapter of John, but the story begins back in chapter 9. So we cannot separate this. So I'm just going to tell you the story. How does it begin in chapter 9? It begins with a man who is born blind, a man blind from birth. He's begging on the side of the road, and he hears Jesus approaching. He hears Jesus approaching, and he asks to be healed. And so Jesus heals him. And you right, remember, it causes quite a stir, quite a scandal in the community, because people are wondering, how is it that you who were born blind, we've seen you on the side of the road, on the sidewalks our entire life. You can see now? How did that happen? So they get the religious authorities involved, and they do kind of an interrogation. And they're like, hey, how is it you were born blind? And the man says, a man named Jesus has healed me. And the authorities are like, okay. So they try to find him. They can't. So what do? They hunt down the man's parents. And they say, hey, was it your kid that was born blind? And now he can see? How did that happen? And the man's parents say, I don't know, ask him. And so they go back to the man again and say, how is it? So you get the point here. You get the point. This story that we hear today is directly connected to this person who was born blind, who has been healed, but he first hears the voice of his shepherd. And so that's the context. Jesus is speaking to the Pharisees here in response to the healing of this man who had been born blind. The man had never seen clearly. He had lived in a tent his whole life, kept apart from the world. But Jesus gives him an opportunity to fully engage with life. Another thing about this story, chapter 9, is that the man is expelled from his community. He's kicked out. Because of his association with Jesus, he is expelled from the community that has supported him and his family his whole life. And so Jesus responds, and this, again, remember, Jesus is calling himself a shepherd. Why is he calling himself a shepherd? Because the people who were supposed to be shepherding this young man dropped the ball. This is my translation of what Jesus might have said. Hey, you spiritual leaders charged with shepherding your people, guarding your people, protecting your people. Obviously, that's not happening now. So Jesus says, now, I'm the shepherd. I'm the one that's going to be leading. The sheep hear my voice and they follow me, and they're going to have a different kind of life. Regardless of their pre-existing condition or how they were born or where they've spent the last 5, 15, 20, 25 years, they're going to be welcomed and affirmed and celebrated. So the key to this story that we hear today of Jesus being a shepherd and a gate is the continuation of a man who's been released. And you may hear some people use this particular passage that we hear today as a way of Jesus trying to keep people out, but it's not. Jesus is not putting more barriers in place. But as you can see, it's just the opposite. Jesus, in this context, has created a wider entry point for God's grace and love to be made real and known. But the man knows that following can come at a risk. All of those who were followers of Jesus risked being rejected by their community. But Jesus does not abandon him. He circles back. Jesus circles back to the man born blind. He had never laid eyes on Jesus, but he comes back and he invites him into a new way of living. And it's not one of darkness and scarcity, but one of abundance. And that's the second major theme that's brought out in this 10th chapter of John. It's the idea of abundance. And we throw that word around a lot in the church. But that's what we are about. We're about abundance. We're about providing abundance, reflecting abundance, embodying abundance, giving abundance away. Where do we first hear about abundance in the Gospel of John? It's at a wedding when Jesus turns a whole lot of water into a whole lot of wine. I came that you may have life and have it abundantly, Jesus tells those who would hear his voice. So you see, in order for Jesus' story of offering abundant life to make any sort of sense, we have to understand it in relationship to the story of this man whose life has been given back to him. He has been saved. Saved from what? Well, there's a preaching colleague who says that the man blind from birth is saved from marginalization and isolation. His healing saves him from everlasting darkness. Never again will he wonder where his next meal comes from and who will answer his pleas as he sits begging outside the city. He will know the safety and security of community. He has a new shepherd and a new pasture. My sheep know the sound of my voice, Jesus says. So today, Jesus is not a gatekeeper. He is not keeping people out. Rather, he is welcoming in those who have been misled, misguided, misinformed. Jesus has created a new space in which all of us, as I understand it, are invited into greener pastures and beside streams where justice and equality flow. And we might keep this in mind as we listen to our forum after church today, which is about the removal of barriers so that people can live and flourish. And yes, this kind of pastoral relationship will always involve trust. Trusting that we are being led, sometimes gently and sometimes with a little more directness, but always with the end goal of God's promise: abundance. So when that Boy Scout leader told me to join the other people around the campfire, I didn't want to do it. I just did not. But I trusted that he wanted a spirit of abundance for me, abundant life. And he knew that I was not going to find it in that tent. Today, Jesus calls us to be his sheep. And we're given an even more expansive vision of what that looks like. A lasting, deep, trusting relationship. And it even calls us to share the holy responsibility of leading, following, looking, and living. We do that here all the time. Sometimes I'm a shepherd, sometimes you're a shepherd. Sometimes you're a sheep, sometimes I'm a sheep. It's always give and take. But the end result is that Jesus welcomes us all into green pastures of opportunity and leads us beside still waters. And in the Hebrew translation, the waters are waters of justice. Available for all people. We don't only drink, we make sure others can drink. We don't only graze, we make sure others can graze. Is there a place in your life right now in which you are being led? Led toward, led away from? Is there a space where you right now are being called to listen differently and more attentively, trusting that God is calling you, leading you? Into what type of abundance are you being led? He leadeth me beside still waters. He spreads a table before me, even in the presence of those who trouble me. The Lord is my shepherd, our shepherd. Whatever could we want?